All right, today we are going to break down a real powerhouse in Islamic finance, the Ijarah Sukuk. Now, I know that might sound a little complex, but the idea at its core, it's actually incredibly simple and honestly pretty powerful. It's all about investing in real things. In a financial world that can feel so abstract, this is a model that's built on tangible assets you can see and touch. So, let's dive in.
So right off the bat, what's the big difference here? Well, think about a conventional bond. That's basically a loan, right? You lend your money, and your return is the interest that gets paid on that debt over time. In Ijarah Sukuk, well, it completely flips that script. Your return isn't tied to a loan at all. Instead, it's connected to the actual rental income from a physical asset, like, say, an office building. We're not just talking about a different product here. This is a totally different way of thinking about where value actually comes from.
And that fundamental shift, it brings us right to our first key section, this idea of investing, not just loaning. It's more than just a different method, it's a whole different philosophy.
And this quote, this really gets to the absolute heart of that philosophy. The idea is that a legitimate financial return should come from a real-world benefit, an asset actually being used or an activity that's genuinely taking place. The profit is generated by the asset itself, not just by a clock ticking on a debt. Big difference.
Okay, so if it's all about a real asset, how does that actually work in the real world? How do you build a financial product around it? Well, it all starts with the concept that's probably way more familiar than you think, a simple lease, or in Arabic, an ijarah.
I mean, just think about renting an apartment or leasing a car. That's pretty much what an ijarah is. It's a super straightforward agreement. You get to use a specific thing for a set amount of time, and you pay a known rental price for it. It's simple, it's clear, and it's totally transparent. And this is the foundational block we're going to build everything else on.
Now, for this lease to be solid, really valid and robust, a few key conditions have to be met. First, you need to know exactly what the asset is. It has to be specific. Then, you need a clearly defined duration. How long does this last? And, of course, an agreed-upon rent. But it also gets into the details, like who's responsible for maintenance. And critically, the asset has to be used for a legitimate permissible purpose. There's no room for ambiguity here. Everything is spelled out.
Okay, so we've got our simple lease. Makes sense. But now, how do we take that concept and build it into a global investment? How do you scale this up so that hundreds, or maybe even thousands of people can all participate together?
Well, the key player that makes this whole thing possible is something called a special purpose vehicle, or SPV for short. The easiest way to think about it is like a separate company, almost like a legal container, that's created for just one single purpose, to buy and hold the asset on behalf of all the investors. It's the bridge that connects the investors to the asset itself. Let's walk through the most common way this works, what's called the sale and leaseback model. So follow me on this. Step 1, a company, we'll call them the originator, sells a big, tangible asset, like its headquarters building, to the SPV. Step 2, to get the money for that purchase, the SPV issues Sukuk certificates to investors, people like you. And just like that, you become a part owner of that building. Step 3, the SPV immediately leases that same building right back to the original company, which then starts buying rent. And step 4 is the best part for investors. That rental income flows from the SPV directly to you, the Sukuk holders. Finally, at the end of the term, the company buys its headquarters back at a pre-agreed price, and you get your original investment back. See? The key thing here is that every single dollar in this cycle is connected to a real asset that's generating real income.
Now, you can imagine an arrangement like this requires a huge amount of trust, right? And that trust isn't just based on a handshake. It's built on a rock-solid foundation of legal paperwork and investor protections. This stuff isn't an afterthought. It's a core, essential part of the entire product.
And that trust is really built on a super detailed legal framework. I mean, this is not a simple handshake deal. It's a whole suite of documents where pretty much every possibility is planned for. You've got the asset purchase agreement for the sale, the Ijarah agreement that sets all the lease terms, and then there's a really critical one, the purchase undertaking. That last one is a binding promise from the original company that they will buy the asset back at the end. Altogether, these documents create a really clear and forcible roadmap for the whole investment.
Okay, this all sounds pretty solid, but what about the big, obvious question? What happens if things go wrong? What if the tenant, that original company, can't pay the rent?
This is where a really proactive risk management framework comes into play. See, it's not about waiting around for problems to happen. It's about mapping out every conceivable risk right from the very beginning. They create what's called a risk register, which is basically a living document that tracks all these potential issues. Then you have early warning systems in place to flag problems, like a late rent payment. And most importantly,
There are predefined mitigation plans, linked directly back to those legal documents that are ready to be activated the second they're needed.
All right, let's switch gears for a second and look at this purely from your perspective, as the investor. What do you actually see, and how do you know your investment is doing what it's supposed to do?
Well, the flow of money is designed to be incredibly clear. You can see it here. The total rent gets collected from the tenant. Then, you subtract any pre-agreed fees for managing the whole structure, the SVB, and so on. And what's left over? That's the net income. And it gets paid out directly to the investors. It's a very straightforward, very transparent waterfall of cash.
And you know, in today's world, this kind of transparency is totally supercharged by technology. Investors don't have to wait for a paper report that gets mailed out once a quarter. They can have real-time access to information through dashboards and transaction logs that track every single part of the investment.
So a proper investor dashboard gives you a complete picture, right at a glance. You can see things like, is the rent paid up? What's the condition of the asset? Are there maintenance reports? Is the insurance coverage current and active? Having all that critical information right at your fingertips, well, that's what builds real confidence and trust in the investment.
And this all brings us right back to that core idea we started with. In a world where so much of finance can feel, well, abstract and kind of disconnected, the Ijarah Sukuk grounds investment in something real, an actual identifiable asset that's generating a predictable income. This isn't just an alternative, it's a fundamentally different approach. So it leaves us with a big question, right? In the search for a more stable global financial system, could we learn something from a model that insists on linking every single dollar of investment back to a tangible real-world asset?